Yeah. Okay. So on behalf of the Democrats Abroad, Global Veterans and Military Families Caucus, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Volunteers Honoring Veterans. This event is being held now as April 30th, which was just 8 days ago, was the anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War in 1975. And today, May 8th, is the 76th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe in 1945. The veterans of those two wars and World War I and the Korean War are all honored in Washington, D.C. by volunteers running some touching programs that you may not know much about until now. Introducing our guest speaker is a member of the Veterans and Military Families Caucus in DA, France, Meredith Wheeler. Meredith is a newly elected voting rep for France and the former vice chair and founder of the Toulouse chapter. She has been living in France for over 20 years, and she grew up in the Chicago area and votes in New York. Meredith, would you like to share some details about our guest speaker?
Yes, thank you. First of all, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking an hour out of your Saturday to be with us. It was at 3 p.m. UK time that the USA and the Allies formally accepted Nazi Germany's unconditional surrender after almost 6 years of war. And Harry Truman had only recently become president a few weeks before, after the sudden death of FDR. And what Truman said at the time was, our victory's only half over, because of course the war in the Pacific was ongoing and carried on until August, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as we all know. Truman asked Americans at the time to refrain from celebrating VE Day out of respect for those in mourning for their husbands or sons or brothers. And at the time, there was a massive invasion being planned of Japan. And I just thought I'd share that my father, who was in the Army Corps of Engineers, mainly in the Caribbean, building airstrips because of Nazi submarines there trying to torpedo oil reserves. He was then being trained for the land invasion of Japan. A massive invasion was planned, and it would have cost tremendous cost in American lives. So this day is meaningful to me because of all that. And Helen also comes from a family that has a military background. But first, let me say, I've known Helen for many years. She's lived in the Washington, D.C. area for 25 years. She came originally from Seattle to work for the FDIC. Her father served in the Army in the South Pacific during World War II, and her two uncles served in the Navy. And she was married to a Coast Guard pilot. And Helen has worked for both the Army and the Navy at the Army Education Center, at the Presidio in San Francisco, in military research at Fort Sill in Oklahoma, in advertising at the Army Recruiting Command in Miami, and in training development at Fort Bliss, Texas, and also in shipyard training development at the Mare Islands in California. So she's speaking today about her volunteer experience in Washington, D.C. related to the military. It's about volunteering to wash, to clean the Vietnam War Memorial, greeting veterans from World War II, but also, as she'll tell us, later wars, and taking them to their the monument in Washington, D.C. in their honor, and laying wreaths at Arlington in December. So Helen, would you like to take it away?
Thank you. I'm going to talk about 3 different volunteer experiences I have living here in Washington, D.C. As I was telling Bob earlier, there's all sorts of ways to volunteer, and some volunteering experiences are more emotional than others. And the 3 that I'm talking about today are very emotional. So if I get a little emotional, it's why. We'll be talking about these young children. One of my programs I do here is Honor Flight. And so those are just some scouts that we had a picture of. So Bob, you can start with the first one. So the first thing I volunteer to do is cleaning the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall. You know, I'm sure most people walking by this wall don't even think it needs to be cleaned. It's because every weekend, April through November, a team of volunteers shows up to clean the wall. And this is what it looks like when we arrive at sunrise. And the next one. The National Park Service manages the volunteers that come. They show up, they have hoses, they have buckets with soap we fill, and they have brushes. And they provide all the materials and the volunteers do all the work. So here is one of my friends washing the wall. First, we hose it off with water before we begin. And the next one. We wash every piece of the wall, every name. These, you'll see here some of my team is always a team of women, 8 to 10 women. And here they are scrubbing away. And this is a shorter edge of the wall, so it's not so hard to reach. It takes about us 2 to 2.5 hours to wash the whole wall. We wash the wall and the sidewalk. Okay, the next. Oh, I think we missed one.
Ooh, yep.
These are just some pictures showing how high the wall is and how sometimes it's a stretch. There I am in the middle hosing the wall, and one on the right. Again, I take about 8 to 10 women in my team. We would like to do this more often, but there are so many volunteers that sign up, and there are volunteer groups that have been doing this for many years. I've been doing it since 2014. They haven't been doing this volunteer program during COVID. I was at the wall actually yesterday and I spoke to a ranger. He says they've washed it once at the beginning of the season in April, and they'll be washing it again before Memorial Day. And just the rangers will do that. They didn't have volunteers last year and they haven't had them yet this year. So the next. This is an aerial view of the memorial. I imagine that many of you have been there, but if you haven't, it's built into the side of the earth. You don't even know it's there until you come upon it. You might know the history of it. There was a contest in 1981. There were 1,500 entries, and Maya Lin was a young woman from Yale University, an art student there, who won. Her design won. And as we know, it's very unique. And at the time that it was dedicated in 1982, it was very, very unique. She said she didn't need a tall statue, that the names were the memorial. She chose this shape. It's like cutting into the earth, like a wound cutting into the United States. And she hoped that someday the wound would heal. And that's why this shape, she made it in this shape. And then Bob, if you want to show the, I'll be showing pictures, but there's a flagpole there. To the left, you can't see. It's the 3 soldiers. I'll show you their picture. And to the right is the women's memorial that was added about 10 years later.
Helen, do you want to explain where the numbers start from and what year?
Yes, actually, you see the middle of that chevron. The first name is on the right, the first panel there. And the first name is from 1959. And the names are listed in chronological order of the person's death. So as you go to the right, as the wall gets smaller, the names are listed again in chronological order. When you get to the end of there's 70 panels on each side. So when you get to the 70th panel on that side where Bob's cursor is, It starts again at the other end, at the other short end, and it follows again in chronological order all the way to the center point. So at the two panels that are next to each other, right in the middle, you have the first names from the beginning of the war, from 1959, and then you have the last names from 1975. As I mentioned, they're listed chronologically by the date. There are 140 panels. This was, you know, when you think of Maya Lin, she was 20 years old when she designed this, but there's so many parts of it that are just so unique and creative and very meaningful. The names are listed in order that they died. And if a group of soldiers died, like 10 of them, on the same date, they are listed in alphabetical order. This means that a family can walk up to someone's name, find their name, and see all of the other soldiers that may have been with them that day. It's also great for veterans coming back who were in the war and they see a name of someone they know that died in their unit, and they see all of the other people that died also in that unit. There are booklets that you can use. Oh, you can go forward, Bob.
Okay.
There are booklets on each end of the wall that people can use to look up the names. Since they're not in alphabetical order, they're by chronological order. So people can look up the names, find the person they're looking for. It might say panel number 13 West, row 80. So they can go to, they're all marked, each panel is marked, they can go there. And this just shows a family doing a rubbing of a name. A lot of people do that. And as you can see to the right, people leave flags and notes. I was there yesterday and there were some pictures of the soldiers that people leave. When we arrive on Saturday morning to clean the wall, the Rangers pick up any materials that were there. They take them and they are they're logged in and they are archived. Okay. Again, this just is a print of a soldier standing at the wall. And again, you can see the last panel is there, 1975, and to the right of it would be the very first panel. So the full circle of the beginning of the war, the first deaths and the last deaths. Oh, I was mentioning that you can look up the names in two large books that they have, but now when I was there yesterday, you can scan your phone over a QR code and it pops up on your phone, which is wonderful. So now, you know, people can just scan that QR code, open their phone, and they can easily use that to find anyone they're looking for. The next one is a statue that was put up the year after in 1983, and it is a statue of three soldiers that are staring at the wall from a distance. And the next slide will show the back of those soldiers, and you can see them standing together, and you can see the wall in the distance. About 10 years later, the Women's Vietnam Memorial statue was put up, and it shows three nurses holding a wounded soldier. There are 8 women's names on that wall out of the over 58,000, 3 women's names, and 8 women's names, and they were all nurses. Bob, did you want to talk something about the?
I just think this slide here really captures so much emotion. This one is looking up towards the sky, looking for the helicopter that's coming, hopefully really soon, to take this wounded soldier back to the hospital. And of course, this is the main face that you saw in the statue from the previous picture. And behind and in back is this person who's holding the helmet of the soldier and looks exhausted and loaded with grief. A very powerful statue.
One thing I didn't mention when you're reading the names on the wall, next to each name, there's a little diamond. The diamond indicates that they did die during the war. A cross, if a cross is next to a person's name, it means they are still missing in action. And once their remains are found and their name is put, and they change the cross next to their name into a diamond. So you can see as you're reading the names on the wall whether there are some that are still missing in action. So that's what I do a couple Saturdays a year, washing the wall. And the next volunteer event I'm going to talk about is Honor Flight. Now, the World War II Memorial was dedicated in 2004, and Honor Flight started a year later in 2005. One of the men who started it, Earl Morris, he was a retired Air Force captain, and he was working as a physician's assistant at VA clinics. So when the World War II Memorial was opened in 2004, he was asking World War II veterans that were his patients, were they going to go to see the memorial? And he was in Illinois or Ohio. And he just interviewed like 40 of them, and all 40 said, no, I'll never get there. I'll never get to see it. So he decided that they should get to see it. And he started with friends with private planes. And the first year they flew 120 World War II veterans to see their World War II memorial. The next year he met a man, Jeff Miller. Jeff Miller was never in the military, but his father was a World War II veteran. Jeff was a businessman, and he heard about this idea, and he joined together with Earl, and they created Honor Flight. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, and that's when they started flying veterans on commercial flights. So I am a volunteer for when the flights come into Washington, D.C. They come into BWI Airport or Dulles or National, and I'm a volunteer at National Airport, and we do what's called a hero's welcome. They arrive at the airport on their flight and they don't know that they're getting this hero's welcome. It's a surprise for them. So the next one, when they arrive and get off the plane at their gate, there could be an honor guard, there could be a small Army band or a Navy band. We welcome them. They're very, very surprised. They don't know that they're going to get this welcome. And you can see one of the escort is helping that man in the wheelchair. He's an escort that has come with him from his hometown. And it's just wonderful. You can just see how happy he is and surprised. Now, when they arrive, we're waiting there at the gate. We actually get a gate pass to go to the specific gate where the flights are arriving. And people just happen to be at that gate, normal travelers, see our flags. I always am carrying my little flag. And they ask us what's going on. So we tell them about Honor Flight, and they always say the same thing: how can I participate? So we tell them when the veterans come off the flight, just walk up to them, shake their hand, thank them for their service. And that's what they do. So you not only have the volunteers that show up, but you have people at the gate. And you can see that woman is applauding. We applaud as they come out, and we shake their hands and give them a hug and thank them for their service. This is another little boy. He asked what people were doing, and they said they're shaking hands with veterans. And he said, I want to do it too. So he walked up, and there I am, just saying thank you to one of the veterans. As you can see, it gets very emotional for volunteers and for the veterans. You can't get through one of these events without crying. It just happens. Once they arrive at the airport, they're taken to see the World War II Memorial. For those that are on the East Coast, where they just had a short flight, they fly them in the morning. We welcome them at the airport. They are taken to their memorial. They're also taken around DC to other memorials and have lunch, and then they fly back home. Now that's a lot for somebody in their 80s and 90s. And you can see so many of them are in wheelchairs. If a flight is coming in from, say, Missouri or California, farther west, they spend the night. So they fly in, we do the same greeting, they go to the memorials, have lunch, and then they spend the night and they fly home the next day. So this is just a large group. They had matching t-shirts made for their group. This is all done in their home state. And a group photo at the memorial. Again, it's very emotional for these men to know that now they have a memorial. And there's just so much emotion just in that picture. And this is a t-shirt some of the ground crew volunteers wear, which I love. It shows the memorial. And we can't all be heroes. Some of us get to stand on the curb and clap as they go by. And that's a quote by Will Rogers. So that is honor flight. I get to do that. I sign up, and the honor flights are actually starting again in June. That's what they've been telling us. So when flights are coming in, starting at the end of June, we'll be volunteering and heading to the airport for honor flight. And the next one, this is the last one I'll be talking about, the wreath laying that we have at Arlington National Cemetery. It happens the third Saturday of December. And it takes place every year, and it started in 1992. Next. The way the wreaths get here, they're from a wreath company in Maine. It takes them 2.5 days to drive down here from Maine. This shows a picture of all the huge 18-reelers filled with wreaths. You can see all the way down to the end of the line, you see the Lincoln Memorial. Usually there's about, these days, in 2019, I think there were 26 18-wheelers. And they have, each of them has maybe 5,000 to 10,000 wreaths inside each of them. And they're all decked out with wreaths across America. And you'll see, I'll mention later, you can see on the side under the wreath that their mission is to remember, honor, and teach. This is the next photo. Because there are so many trucks and so many volunteers and so many graves to cover, the trucks spread out across all of Arlington National Cemetery. If you've been there, you know it's huge. And so trucks position themselves all over the cemetery. Volunteers come up, and they grab a wreath or two. Early on, only maybe hundreds of wreaths were coming. And so we would each get one wreath that we could take and put on one grave. Now there are not hundreds of wreaths, there are hundreds of thousands of wreaths. And we stand in line, and you just pick which grave you would like to go to, and you lay your wreath. Now this is a tag that's on every single wreath. It has the mission to remember the fallen, to honor those who serve, and to teach the children about the values of fighting for freedoms. Now, this is significant for all of us that put a wreath on a grave. Excuse me, I knew I'd get emotional, because we remember them and we honor them. So every wreath we put on a grave, we say their name. Now, I'll give you a little background of how this started. It was in 1992, and in Maine, a wreath company had extra wreaths at the end of the year, and they knew they would have a surplus. So the owner of this wreath company, Morrill Wooster, he remembers coming to Washington, D.C. when he was 12 years old. He was a paper boy, and he won a contest. And the contest was a trip to Washington, D.C. And when he talks about that trip, and I've heard him talk many times, he said the most moving part of it was seeing the Arlington National Cemetery. So when he had these extra wreaths in 1992, he's a grown man, his first thought was, I want to take these to Arlington. So he called up his senator and said, can I bring these wreaths down? And there were just a couple of hundred of them. So he brought them down, and that was the first time wreaths were laid in 1992. So remember, honor, and teach is on the tag of every wreath, and that's what we remember when we're laying the wreath. Remember the fallen, honor them, and teach. Wreaths Across America has volunteers that travel around the US and give presentations, a lot of them in schools, to teach the young children about World War II, about the veterans from every war. And it's just a good lesson for the children. And in 1992, he had a hope that someday he would put a wreath on every grave. Okay, the next slide. This is just one of the graves to show you the wreath. It's usually positioned right on the grave, but this picture is just to show you. This just happens to be a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force who was in World War II. He earned a Purple Heart, and he was a prisoner of war. So every stone tells a story as we're putting the wreaths on the stories, on the graves. And just a little bit of information about these gravestones. The headstones are made of either Georgia or Vermont marble. They each weigh 250 pounds, which was surprising to me because they don't seem that big and that heavy, but I guess marble weighs a lot. They're 4 inches deep, 13 inches wide, and 42 inches tall. Now, each headstone may be adorned. This one has a cross on it. Each headstone can be adorned with one of 60 what they call emblems of belief, or nothing on the stone at all. So if you want to see the 60 emblems of belief and try to figure out what all of those 60 various ones are, if you just Google Arlington National Cemetery and emblems of belief, you will see all of them. From the Muslim sign to Mormons. It's just very interesting. I usually open it up on my phone, the app, and as I'm walking through the cemetery on any given day, because it's a great place to walk, I pass by a grave that I haven't seen before, the symbol, and I look it up on my app. The next, it says that 25, if you go back, I forgot to mention that last year and in the last couple of years, 250,000 wreaths are laid on Christian graves in Arlington National Cemetery. So from the few hundred that started in 1992, we're now laying them on just about every grave. The next photo, a photo I took a few years ago. We do this the third week of December every year, and you never know in Washington, D.C., in Virginia, if we're going to have a mild winter at that point in December. I just love this picture because it showed the fall leaves. We hadn't had much cold weather yet. This is my favorite picture, but the next picture we're going to show changed the direction of Wreaths Across America. In 2005, someone took this picture because it snowed that day on the wreaths, on the graves. This picture went viral. It went so viral across the US that people who never heard about this now learned about it. Donations poured in to Wreaths Across America. And again, they started in 1992, and this is 2005 when this photo was taken. And not only donations, but other cemeteries around the US heard about it. And the next year, in 2006, 130 cemeteries laid wreaths on the graves in on the veterans' graves in their cemeteries on the same exact day. And that's when it really became Wreaths Across America. Now, 2,500 cemeteries across the US lay wreaths on the third Saturday in December. And in 2018, for the first time, wreaths were shipped to France, and they were laid on 9,000 graves in Normandy. And the last picture just shows that all variety of people come to lay wreaths. People bring their children, which I think is wonderful. and it fits with the mission to remember, honor, and to teach. So that's my experience with the 3 different kind of volunteer opportunities I have living here in the Washington, D.C. area, washing the wall, honoring the veterans with honor flight, and laying wreaths in December. And the next slide will give you the websites for donations. Very simply, Honor Flight is honorflight.org. Wreaths Across America is wreathsacrossamerica.org. And the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund is vvmf.org. And there's a donation button on each of those. We'll show this again at the end of the presentation, or if you'd like to take a screenshot now on your phone or laptop or however you're watching, or do what I often do, I just take a picture of the screen. Again, we'll show this at the end. So now I am happy to introduce Meredith, who introduced me. Meredith Wheeler, you've heard something about her from Bob. And you can go to the next slide, Bob. As you know, Meredith has lived in France for over 25 years. And she has the distinction of being the local porte-drapeau, which means that she is the American flag carrier every time they have a military commemoration in her area of the Tarn where she lives. And those of you who know Europe, they have very many military commemorations for World War I or World War II. So Meredith is the porte-drapeau very many times. And Meredith this is very interesting. Meredith has been living in that area of the Tarn. She's interested in the history of the OSS mission in the Tarn in 1944. Because of her interest in this, she received a Fulbright grant from the American Embassy in Paris to research and document this history. And she helped organize the 75th anniversary commemoration of that mission in 1944. So 2 OSS commandos were killed during that mission. So American families of those 2 OSS commandos attended the ceremony, the 75th anniversary ceremony in the Tarn that Meredith organized. It included a parachute drop by currently serving American and French Special Forces. It's interesting because the OSS commandos also landed in the Tarn by parachute, but they did it in the dark of night. Meredith received a bronze medal from the Union Fédérale, the largest veteran association in France, for her work. And so now she's going to tell us about an event that she organized honoring a World War II veteran in Paris.
Thank you, Helen. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say we found your presentation very moving. I'm sure a few tears were shed around the globe. Thank you for the work that you do. And it's really the inspiration of Helen that gave me this idea. I was going up to Paris. It was Valentine's Day in 2020. We were going to have a ceremony under the Arc De Triomphe at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And we needed a veteran to lay a wreath for the OSS. And this man you see in the picture in the middle is Stephen Weiss. He lived in London at the time. He was 94 years old, and he had worked with the OSS in France. And I sent him an email saying, would you like to come do this? Thinking, you know, he'll never say yes, but he said yes, he'd love to do it. And so I realized then that he was traveling alone on the Eurostar, and I was up in Paris to meet him. And as I was getting ready to go to the Gare du Nord, I thought, Helen had these wonderful welcome committees. Maybe we could do that for Stephen Weiss. And so I put out a call on social media on Democrats Abroad Facebook pages and Americans in Paris, and said, if anybody's free at 5 p.m.
Ooh, I think we've lost Meredith for a moment.
People I knew personally who showed up, but a lot of people showed up. And as Stephen walked down from the train, he said to the man helping him with his luggage, who are these people waiting for? Because let's go on to the next slide there. We had these flags. There you see Clark. And I'm sure some of you in Paris will recognize some of these other folks. The man on the far right, Mark Primer, runs the Veterans of Foreign War Post 1 in Paris. And next to him is Cyril Prefor. He's the French former special services soldier with whom I organized this. It was really his idea. He had the contacts in Paris to make this happen. So here we are. People brought signs, they brought flowers, they brought food. Let's just go on. And this is really all inspired by me hearing about Helen's work. And that's what made me want to share this with you, because I just hope that her work will also inspire all of you, wherever you are, to support this kind of honoring of veterans. This is at the Gare du Nord, and then the last picture there. And here we are at the Arc de Triomphe. You can see Stephen had the Légion d'honneur, the highest honor, and he was thrilled to be here for this event. It was a very touching event. He went home to London after this, really feeling fulfilled that his life had come full circle, and he died about 5 days later. But I think it was a fabulous end to a life. So that's all I wanted to share. Bob, I think one of the things, Helen, actually, you didn't mention, but going back to the Arlington stones, tell us what happens for the stones for people who are Jewish that were buried there, because when we talked about this earlier, you mentioned that. I thought it was touching.
Yes, we know by the emblem on each stone if they're Christian or not. We look at the little app, and so we lay a wreath because it's a Christmas wreath on the gravestones for Christians. If it's a Muslim, some people bring flowers and just leave flowers at the grave. If it's a Jewish person, we bring stones. We always carry a few stones, and we put stones on top of the grave in the Jewish tradition. You mentioned that Dr. Weiss died 5 years after he returned, which is
5
really
days.
5 days after he returned home to London. And it reminds me, we get letters when we do honor flight. We get letters from family members. And one was from a woman who said that it was her father's dream to see the memorial. And he came. It was difficult because he was ill, but he came home, and 2 days later he died. And she was so thankful that he had that opportunity.
I just want to acknowledge all the messages in the chat too. If you aren't looking at the chat on this, you can open it at the bottom of your screen. Many people who are here today have parents who were involved in World War II, and it's quite touching what people are putting in the chat box. We are going to have time for some people to share their comments and remembrances too. And we should also say that Helen, they're taking people now to the Korean War Memorial too, aren't they? And to the Vietnam Memorial.
Yes, we are losing World War II veterans every day. There were 16 million World War II veterans. It's 16 million people who served during World War II, Americans. Of those, there's only about 250,000 left, with about 200 to 250 dying every day. I looked at a chart the other day showing there's going to be a point when we don't have any more World War II veterans out of the 16 million who served. So honor flight now includes bringing people in, veterans who served in the Korean War to see their Korean memorial, and to the Vietnam Memorial. So those are now included in honor flight. And really any soldier from any war, like if a soldier fought in Afghanistan and maybe he has a terminal illness now and he's dying, that's another category of people that they are able to take an honor flight to.
I think Bob has some pictures so we can see the Korean War Memorial.
I do. Can you all hear me? Oh,
Yes.
I'm muted. Here's the picture, first of all, of World War I. We're going to go through this kind of quickly. This was just 3 weeks ago. Everyone is social distancing, as you can see. And this was dedicated just 3 weeks ago in April. And so I didn't find many pictures actually to choose from. But this is one picture that captures from a height. Here's another picture. And here is a statue that is still under construction. So it's evolving. We also have, oh yeah, then the Western Front and General Pershing's boot right here, big statue for him. I'm going to go kind of quickly here. World War II Memorial. So here's the Lincoln Memorial way off in the distance, and behind us is the Washington Monument. And this is comprised of 56 pillars going around, and these triumphal arcs that are representing the theaters of the Atlantic, and over here is the theater of the Pacific. And those 56 pillars are representing the 50 states and 6 territories. You have this big, large, oval fountain in the middle. Arlington National Cemetery is off in this distance across the Potomac, Lincoln. Here it is down here, the World War II Memorial. Here's a close-up. I'm going kind of fast because I want to get question and answers. As you can see, this is the Pennsylvania pillar with the Washington Monument in the background. Gorgeous pictures of evening time, my goodness. And this is a Price of Freedom wall. Each one of these stars represents 100 people, 100 Americans who died during World War II. And also very quickly, this is the Korean War Memorial. It's made up of 4 parts. We have this triangle here, which is the main part. And in that are 19 7.5-foot tall statues. They're all marching in, not marching, but they're all on patrol, moving in this direction. And this triangle is intersecting with this pool of remembrance, the circular fountain down here. This wall back here is polished black granite. And these 19 statues that I'm going to show you here and here and here, these 19 statues reflect off of that wall. So it makes 38, which is very symbolic for the Korean War. The 38th parallel was between the South Korea and North Korea. And it also represents 38 months that the war was waged. Etched in the wall are 2,000 images, photographic images from the war. This is the pool of remembrance. This is where one side of the triangle goes down this sidewalk. Back here are the statues that I was showing you. And down the other side is this wall, the black reflective wall. And freedom is not free is, I didn't think I would be getting emotional today.
And Bob, while you're getting emotional, I'll pop in and just mention that I was at the Korean Memorial yesterday and they're renovating it. They are adding, it's under renovation right now. You can go through most of it, but you can't, the reflecting pool there is closed, but they are going to add the 43,000 names of our servicemen who lost their lives during the Korean War. They're going to have another wall.
Do you know where that other wall is going to go?
It's going to be right, right now they have fences around the reflecting pool area. And it just shows that it's going to be kind of maybe parallel to it or perpendicular to it, I guess.
A continuation of Maya Lin's design.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you've seen this slide before. Let's go back to people going into the chat box and writing down questions or comments that you might want to share. So you know where the chat box is. We've been monitoring it. One of the hosts, Therese, that you haven't seen or heard from yet, has been monitoring those questions. We got like 8 more minutes. Therese, do you have some questions that you think would be worth a while to jump in with, or do you want to just open it up?
There are just a lot of wonderful comments. We don't have any questions, so perhaps we could just have people do star hand up that have something to share with the group from a personal experience or an experience in the war or a relative that had an experience.
I
Let's
see
hear-
Helen Thurston's hand up.
Yep.
Okay, so would Helen like to unmute herself and speak?
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on your location. Hi, Meredith. Helen, what a great program. Bob, you're an amazing host. Thank you for this program. Thank you so much. We have been to the memorial services at the Soldiers and Sailors Monuments in New York City, and I have a client that's a historic cemetery. We put flags out on all the veterans' graves, but the wreaths are so much more beautiful, and I will bring this to their attention. It's part of the large groups of cemeteries in New York City that are historic, founded way back in the 1800s. My question is, what about all the non-American citizens who volunteer to serve in the military? And I believe that if they are killed in service, then their families get citizenship. But are they, even though they're not American citizens, are they listed on these monuments?
As far as I know, yes, they are listed. There are questions about those who aren't listed. For instance, there was a plane crash over the Pacific of soldiers going to Vietnam. So they weren't in the Vietnam theater or the area. So I think some of those are not on the wall. And there's always discussions going back and forth about that, about who to add to the wall. Names are added to the wall quite often. I think the last time there might have been 20 names, either in 2018, I think, and they just engraved the names in there. So they continue to add names or change names, designations from missing in action to killed in action.
Oh, that's good to know, because I feel our military is moving sort of into a mercenary situation where we offer citizenship to people like the Romans did, who fight for us. I also want to let you know that there is an organization that has the the World Trade Center Remembrance tree. It's the only Cagliari pear that survived the World Trade Center, and you can apply for a sprout from that tree and plant it in a memorial location. So I'll share that with Meredith, and then she can share it with you. It's open. You have to have a 501c3, but it's an amazing thing to have a tree like that as a memory. And it's not just for memory of the World Trade Center victims, it's for in memory of any serious loss.
Wow, excellent. Excellent. Teresa, is there another question from the audience?
No, we don't have another question. So would someone like to put up his or her hand and share something?
Connie, are you still on the call? What you put in the chat box was so amazingly touching.
Well, thank you, Meredith. Yeah, it absolutely formed my whole life. It formed my youth, because when my father died, I was 3 years old. My mother didn't remarry until I was almost 12. So I spent all those years with her and the VA, Veterans Administration. Every few months I had to go in. They checked on what I was doing. They checked on how I was doing in school. I mean, it was just amazing. I don't know if they still do that, Meredith.
But your father was shot down in the Pacific Theater, Connie, was that what you wrote?
Actually, no. What happened is his plane crashed. It didn't even crash in action. It crashed while they were in training, but he was honored as he was just about ready to go overseas. And his plane, I never knew why, but the plane went down, not on enemy territory, but he had the gold star. We had the gold star in our window the whole time I was growing up. But there were lots of boys from my hometown. That was in Brighton, Massachusetts. Lots of boys who lost their lives. And we grew up with that, you know, all through the 40s. And it was part of our shared misery. All those parents who must have been only in their 40s, you know, and they had these young boys who died. There was a sign on every street corner where they renamed the street after one of the kids who died. I mean, these guys were 20, some were younger, some came back blind, and really, that war was a terrible war. But people were never against that war. People never demonstrated against that war, and people were awfully sad, but they were very proud. The government made them proud that their sons. Actually, there were no women. My aunts and stuff were in the waves and the wax, but they weren't in action. But these guys went off because they believed in something, and it's always hard for me to be anti-war, which I am. But when I think of the sacrifices and what they did and what they believed in, it just really makes you think twice. Makes you think twice about, you know, fighting for democracy. If you think you're fighting for democracy, you're fighting for democracy, whatever it is.
I don't know if any of you are able to watch PBS wherever you are in the world, but there's a wonderful show going on now on Masterpiece Theater called Atlantic Crossing. If you can watch it, it's about the relationship with the US and Norway and the Prince and Princess of Norway during World War II. It's called Atlantic Crossing.
I see another question in the box.
Yes, Robert Scott has a question. Robert? Oh,
Yes, I'm sorry, I was just trying to unmute. Thank you very much. An excellent presentation and a very moving presentation. Helen, how many honor flights come in per year when they're happening?
There are 120 hubs, we call them hubs, located all around the US. People fly in from those hubs. I don't know the exact number that came in 2019, but I don't know the exact number of flights, but I do know the exact number of veterans that came in, World War II veterans, and that's 240,000 have come in so far over the years from 2005. I don't know how many. I think on their website, they do say how many each year, but they do come from those 120 hubs. And again, I just volunteer at National Airport, but they come into BWI and also to Dulles Airport. I have a friend who volunteers at Dulles, and even she's a volunteer at her fire station, and even the fire station got involved, and they brought the bus from Dulles and they made a stop at the fire station because many of the fire station volunteers are veterans. So there's a lot of wonderful connections, but 240,000 since it started. I'm afraid I don't know how many every year.
thank you.
And
Connie Board has a question for Helen.
Yeah, Helen, the story that I just said about the Veterans Administration, does that continue on today? What happens to the children of veterans? Because I have the impression that the Vietnamese, the boys who fought in Vietnam, didn't get the same kind of attention as the ones who did in World War II or other wars.
Yes, I made a note when you mentioned that it's something I would be interested to know what the Veterans Administration, what they do for widows and children of members who die now in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, wherever there's we're fighting. I made a note to check on that, but I don't know. I'll have to check on that myself.
Yeah.
And then Helen Thurston has a question in the chat box asking if there are any noticeable differences in vet treatment during this administration as compared to the previous administration. Bob, would you like to comment on that?
I have no information about that. Does anybody else? Robert, perhaps?
No, I'm sorry, I don't have any information about that directly, but I would like to make one comment since a statement was made about Vietnam vets. When I returned from Vietnam, we were told prior to leaving Da Nang that as soon as we got back to the States, we should take our uniforms off, change into civilian clothes, because, you know, we might be confronted if not. When I landed in San Francisco, I was taking a flight down to LA and I didn't have time to change. So I was in my uniform, a little bit nervous about what might happen. But when I got on the plane, I was sitting next to an individual who had served in Vietnam. He had been a helicopter mechanic. And what he said to me was, "Welcome home." And he worked for the airline that I was flying on. And as a matter of fact, he got in touch with one of the flight attendants. And basically, I found out later what he said to the flight attendant: "You should bring us a bottle of champagne." And I was a captain at the time, and he said Captain Scott's glass should never be empty. And we drank and talked until we landed in LA. And I said goodbye to him, and he helped me get a taxi to get to bus terminal. I forgot exactly what the name of it was. And when I got to the terminal and got out of the taxi and got ready to pay the taxi, he said, "This has been taken care of. Your friend said to tell you welcome home."
Oh,
And that was very moving. And I had an unbelievable experience when I returned, and I expected just the opposite.
Thank you for
Wow.
sharing that.
Robert,
I
what
don't-
year was that?
I came back in 1972.
Oh,
Karen Lee has a question. She'd like to know if there's a place that collects the artifacts that different any organizations that families may have from their, grandfathers, footlockers or mess kits or things like that.
geez.
Does the Smithsonian collect those things, Helen? Do you know?
I know that there's an office in the archives that collects what people leave at the Vietnam Memorial. I don't know where you can send things in, but I would try the Smithsonian
Hmm.
as a
Okay.
starting point.
Right. I don't see any other questions.
We're at 4:04 now, everyone.
Okay.
Yes, I have a very quick question. Since this is Democrats Abroad, it's Helen Thurston, New York. The big difference I know about the Democratic administration versus the prior administration is that Trump belittled veterans. Remember, he said that veterans were the ones who were the losers, they died. And I think that since we're in a Democratic group, we should be, as Democrats, getting that message out loud and clear every single chance we get, because the Republican caucuses are controlled by Trumpsters, and all the candidates are going to be rabid Trumpsters, and we really have to fight against that now. It's a serious threat. So the message has to be that Democrats honor veterans.
Hmm. Amen.
I'll add
Yeah.
one more story.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Ellen.
When we're washing the wall and when we're laying the wreaths, it's very solemn. I'm so proud of my team. These women are quiet and respectful. But when we lay the wreaths, I learned that on the back of every gravestone, if the veteran's wife could be buried with her husband. So if you see a stone, you see, like I showed before, the veteran's name, what war he was in, when he was born and when he died. If you look at the back of the stone, it in many cases will give the wife's name. I happen to have a friend in Colorado, and her great uncle is buried at Arlington Cemetery, and both of his wives are buried with him. His first wife died, and she was buried with him, and then he was married again. I mean, she died, but he married again. So when he was buried, he was buried alone, and then his first wife died and she was buried with him, and his second wife died and she was buried with him too. So that just makes me smile, the way that the world should be.
Yeah.
I noticed that Diane Haven just joined the call. She was participating in a VE Day ceremony at Ramstein Air Base,
Huh.
commemorating a run in Japan. And I'm sure it would be really enlightening if Diane could just squeeze in a few words to tell us about that. Diane?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, could you tell us about what your husband organized today at Ramstein?
I will.
Oh, we can't hear you, Diane.
Can we?
She's muted.
Oh, unmute yourself.
I thought I did. Oh,
Okay,
my internet's acting up, so. Okay, can you guys hear me now?
yes, fine.
Oh, Doug did high school students junior ROTC program. They did a Bantam Memorial March today. It was a fundraiser, and we raised about $9,000. It was amazing.
Wow.
And the students had to walk 14 miles today. Security police, each group had 2 security forces with them just to make sure everyone would be safe. We had checkpoints along the way. And Doug just made sure that his students, you know, when they went home and they were tired and exhausted, but he reminded them what the real march was about, and that we think of these people when we do this march.
Thank you, Diane. And thank you for coming after a long day.
Okay, I'd like to wrap us up with a couple of announcements. First of all, thank you so much for attending. In these very busy times, you have many choices about how you spend your time, and we really appreciate you choosing to attend today's presentation. The DA, the Democrats Abroad Global VMF Caucus, is hosting some future webinars. On Memorial Day, May 30th, we will be hosting a Remembrance Day. And then on June 8th, we will be co-hosting an event with the Global Black Caucus about the Tulsa Race Massacre, when 100 years ago, an entire Black neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, built by many veterans, was attacked and destroyed. We're also planning webinars about veteran mental health and PTSD. If you would like to receive a link to this recording, or if you arrived late or wish to send it to a friend or be on our mailing list, please type your email address in the chat box. We'll give you a moment now if you want to do that. Honor Flight Wreaths Across America and Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund thrive because of people like us making donations. So it's really easy to log on to their website and make either a recurring monthly donation or one donation. All donations are welcome and accepted with gratitude. Lastly, Teresa and I really want to take this opportunity to express our appreciation and gratitude to Meredith and, and to Helen for being such inspirations for this webinar and for getting all of us volunteering in whatever ways we can for veterans all around the world. How about a round of applause visually for those two?
Thank you, Bob, for being willing to host this when not everyone was.
Thank
was
you
not-
for all the organizing.
Meredith. And we hope that
Thank
those of you who don't belong to the Veterans and Military Family Caucus will join. I put the link in the chat box, so but you can always, we can always send it to you if you put your email in chat box too. So I hope you are going to continue to celebrate VE Day. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sounds
Thanks,
good.
everyone.
you.
Have a good day.
Doing
Goodbye, everyone.
great.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.